Welcome to the captivating realm of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our exciting new stories. Enjoy the journey.
Dr. Ilara Sinar paced the gleaming, sterile corridors of the Serini Research Station, her mind humming with curiosity. Today, after months of planning, she would welcome her first human guest, a scientist named Dr. Cole Rivers. Ilara's curiosity was something her people barely tolerated, especially since it often led her down paths they deemed unproductive or primitive. But the chance to finally debunk the exaggerated myths about human breeding was irresistible. Her notes, meticulously arranged on her datapad, flashed questions designed to poke through what she assumed was a web of misunderstandings. In the Serini Imperium, the concept of physical and emotional bonds between partners was seen as quaint. Almost primitive, yet there was something about humanity's persistence in clinging to these so-called bonds that intrigued her. Ilara was determined to understand, no, to demystify, the rumors. A chime echoed through the hall, signaling Dr. Rivers's arrival. Straightening, Ilara prepared herself. She imagined the human would be quite stiff, awkward even. How else would a species that relied on biological bonding behave? The doors parted, and in walked Dr. Cole Rivers, smiling as if he'd just arrived at a friend's home. Ilara blinked in surprise. The man was nothing like she'd expected. Tall, with an easy confidence, he radiated a warmth foreign to her Serini sensibilities. His casual attire and relaxed expression seemed, in Ilara's mind, entirely unsuited for a mission of scientific exchange. "Dr. Sinar, I assume?" He greeted, offering a hand, which she stared at blankly before recalling this was a human gesture. She gingerly shook it, noting the curious spark of energy in his touch. "Yes, Dr. Rivers. Welcome to the Serini Research Station." She cleared her throat. "I must say, I look forward to clarifying some misconceptions." Cole chuckled, his eyes glinting with what Ilara could only interpret as amusement. "Misconceptions, huh? Guessing the Serini councils shared a few choice stories about us humans." "Stories, yes." She raised an eyebrow. "Searching for signs of discomfort. Some of your customs are considered rather unusual. I intend to understand them better, objectively, of course." "Of course," he replied, still smiling. "Can't wait to set the record straight." His eyes scanned the polished walls around him. "And I hope to learn a bit about the Serini approach to life, too. Maybe even clear up a few myths of my own." Ilara nearly bristled but held back, realizing that the human's curiosity mirrored her own. She led him to the sleek, minimalistic research suite she'd arranged for their exchange, where her notes lay in careful order, categorized by theme, reproduction, emotional bonds, pair bonding rituals. "Impressive setup," Cole said, glancing over her meticulously prepared questions. "Looks like you've really done your homework on human relationships." Ilara felt a hint of something, embarrassment. She dismissed it, reminding herself that this was a purely academic endeavor. "I aim to approach this scientifically, Dr. Rivers." "Objectivity is crucial," Cole grinned again, an easy confidence emanating from him. "Then let's get to it, Dr. Sinar. I think you're in for a few surprises." For the first time, Ilara wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was seated across from Dr. Cole Rivers in the brightly lit research suite. Dr. Ilara Sinar folded her hands neatly atop her datapad. Her gaze sharp and unflinching. The human watched her with a relaxed, curious expression that almost unnerved her. She cleared her throat, centering herself. This was no place for nerves. This was science. "Let us begin with the simplest queries," she started, her tone clinical. "Human pair bonding rituals. Explain the purpose." Cole chuckled, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "Going straight to the fun stuff, I see." Ilara blinked. "Fun? Is there an error in my wording?" she asked, though she was almost certain there hadn't been. The Serini language seldom left room for ambiguity. He shook his head. "No, it's just, well, pair bonding rituals sounds very formal for something that's Well, pretty informal for most of us. She tilted her head, trying to gauge his meaning. Please elaborate. I understand humans rely on pair bonds to produce offspring, but the concept of fun seems unnecessary for biological purposes. Cole leaned back, an amused smile playing at his lips. Not everything we do is about biology, Dr. Sinar. Pair bonding for us is about connection, understanding, sometimes just sharing life together. It's not purely functional. Connection? Ilera echoed, arching an eyebrow. And by sharing life, do you mean sharing genetic material? A grin split his face, but he managed to stifle a laugh. No. Well, sometimes. But I'm talking about emotional connections. We're social creatures, Dr. Sinar. We like to bond in more ways than just physical. Ilera sat back, letting this sink in. She was no stranger to her people's perception of humanity's primitive emotional dependencies, yet hearing it explained so earnestly made it sound different. Almost compelling, you speak of emotions as though they hold scientific value, she mused, narrowing her gaze. He shrugged, his tone softening. Maybe not in the strictest sense, but they do hold value for us. Emotions give meaning to our experiences, connect us in ways logic can't. Ilera tapped her fingers against the table, momentarily thrown. The Serini find emotion to be a distraction from clarity. She said carefully. Relying on feeling over logic is inefficient. Potentially dangerous. He nodded thoughtfully, as if he'd anticipated this answer. I get that. But for us, emotion is part of what makes life meaningful. It drives us, sometimes to make mistakes, but also to strive, protect, build relationships that go beyond duty or obligation. Protect? Her eyebrow arched again. You suggest you would put yourself in harm's way for another individual based on emotion? Yes, he answered simply, his gaze unwavering. We'd die for someone we love. The air between them thickened. Ilera couldn't fathom such an act. To place one's life at risk for an intangible bond? The Serini would consider it irrational. And yet, as she looked into Cole's eyes, she found herself intrigued. Fascinating, she murmured. Primitive, yet fascinating. He chuckled, crossing his arms. Who knows? Maybe by the end of this, you'll see it a bit differently. She lifted her chin, unwilling to concede to his prediction. But somewhere deep down, a faint ripple of uncertainty stirred, a crack in her pristine understanding of logic. Dr. Ilera Sinar felt her carefully constructed perception slipping, bit by bit. She had come into this exchange determined to remain objective, but now, with Dr. Cole Rivers seated across from her, his expressions warm and his words carrying strange depths, she found herself thrown off balance. Her datapad was open, filled with notes, but now the text seemed almost trivial. They had covered human family structures and pair bonding, but as Cole continued explaining, Ilera realized there were layers to these bonds that her culture had never acknowledged. So, Cole said, leaning forward with an intense curiosity in his eyes, do the Serini feel any attachment at all? Any fondness for, say, family? Ilera bristled slightly, a reflexive response. The Serini do not require emotional attachment to serve family or community. Bonds are rooted in duty and purpose, nothing more. Cole tilted his head, his gaze thoughtful. So there's no such thing as love where you come from? No joy in simply being with someone? Joy. She repeated, almost as if testing the word. It was such an elusive concept, one her people had always viewed as unnecessary, wasteful even. Joy implies irrationality. Attachment impairs judgment, muddles clarity. It's seen as a weakness. Cole's face softened, a strange blend of empathy and sadness that she couldn't decipher. Maybe to you, but for us, those feelings are what give life meaning. Without them, what are we? Just machines. The word struck her. Machines. Serene logic often celebrated efficiency and precision, but she had never equated her people with machinery before. Yet the way Cole said it made her wonder if something vital had been omitted from her people's understanding of life. You imply, then, that meaning is found outside of one's duties? She ventured cautiously. Yes, he replied, and the honesty in his gaze was almost unnerving. Meaning can be in the quiet moments, the connections we make. Like, for example, what drives a parent to protect their child isn't just duty. It's love. A feeling so strong it can't be defined by logic. Ilera frowned, unsure whether to accept this or dismiss it. Her mind spun with questions she hadn't anticipated asking. If love cannot be defined by logic, then how can it be trusted? Cole laughed softly. That's the thing. It isn't always logical. Sometimes it even hurts, makes us vulnerable. But that's what makes it powerful. Ilera was silent, grappling with this notion of vulnerability as strength. For the Sereni, any kind of vulnerability was seen as a flaw, a weakness to be eradicated. Yet here was this human, openly admitting to embracing it, even celebrating it. How strange, she murmured, almost to herself. In our culture, strength is found in stoicism, in unwavering resolve. Yet you describe a strength built on exposure. Cole nodded. To be strong enough to care deeply, even knowing it might hurt you, that's courage, too. A spark of something new flared within her, a tug she didn't quite recognize but couldn't dismiss. Was it curiosity? Or something deeper, more unsettling? She couldn't tell. But she felt compelled to press on. Perhaps, Dr. Rivers, she said slowly, her tone softening, there is more value to your attachments than I first believed. Perhaps logic alone does not provide all answers. Cole smiled, a knowing warmth in his eyes. Maybe, Dr. Sinar. Maybe there's more to life than either of us has been told. And for the first time, Ilera allowed herself to wonder if he might be right. Days passed, and Dr. Ilera Sinar's carefully guarded skepticism began to unravel. Conversations with Cole lingered in her thoughts long after their sessions ended. The Sereni research station, once a fortress of cold, efficient steel, now felt stifling, almost confining, as though its walls were pressing in on her. Today, she had invited Cole to the Sereni Observatory, a room usually reserved for the most high-ranking researchers. With walls of transparent alloy that overlooked the cosmic vastness, the observatory provided a panoramic view of distant nebulae and stars, her comfort zone, the only place where she felt a sense of clarity. As she awaited his arrival, Ilera clasped her hands tightly, her mind racing with questions she could not shake. The light hum announced Cole's entry, and he stepped into the room with an appreciative whistle. Now this, he said, his eyes wide as he looked at the swirling galaxies, is incredible. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. Ilera allowed herself a small smile. A hint of pride creeping in. It is one of the Sereni's most prized views. This room has served many contemplations. Then it's the perfect place for our next topic, don't you think? Cole leaned on the railing, his gaze fixed on the stars. Maybe you can tell me why the Sereni prefer to remain detached. Ilera's gaze followed his, focusing on a particularly bright star in the distance. Detachment is our way of maintaining order. Emotions that they disrupt, complicate. We have learned to thrive without them. But at what cost? Cole's voice was gentle, but his words cut deep. You've dedicated yourself to efficiency, to logic, but what about fulfillment? Fulfillment. The word hung in the air between them. Alien and tantalizing. She hesitated, unsure whether to brush it off or confront it head-on. Fulfillment is a subjective concept. The Sereni believe purpose and progress are sufficient. Cole turned, studying her face. And are they, for you? The question caught her off guard. She shifted uncomfortably, not used to being the one scrutinized. Her voice wavered slightly. I am Sereni. My purpose is in my work, in advancing our knowledge. There is satisfaction in that. Is satisfaction enough? His gaze was steady, compassionate, as though he already knew the answer she was too reluctant to admit. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. How strange. She thought, that this human, a creature she had deemed primitive and irrational, could unsettle her so profoundly with a simple question. Ilara's mind spun. She was suddenly aware of her own isolation, her lifelong dedication to a code that left no room for companionship, no room for warmth or wonder beyond the observable. She had never questioned it, until now. Cole broke the silence. Maybe it's worth exploring, Ilara. Not as a Serini, not as a researcher, but as you. She looked up, caught off guard by the way he said her name, as if it carried weight beyond the mere syllables. The stars outside seemed to blur, and for a moment, she could almost see the world as he did, layered. Uncertain, full of possibility, perhaps, she murmured, her voice barely audible. The word felt foreign, like a door opening somewhere deep within her. Cole smiled, a quiet encouragement radiating from him. Good. Then maybe we're both here to learn something new. Ilara turned back to the vast expanse of stars, a strange warmth blooming in her chest. For the first time in her life, she let herself imagine a different kind of future, one in which logic was balanced by something more, and for the first time, she didn't push the thought away. The line between observation and connection was dissolving, and Dr. Ilara Sinar felt herself slipping across it with each new conversation. Every time she looked at Cole Rivers, she felt a growing awareness, a kindling of something she could neither define nor suppress. Today, their discussion shifted to something deeper than biology, beyond even culture. They spoke of loss. I read that the Serini don't grieve, Cole said carefully, watching her reaction. That loss is seen as a natural recalibration, just part of your logic. Ilara nodded, her expression guarded. That is correct. We regard loss as inevitable, therefore irrelevant to emotional experience. It's simply is. Cole's brow furrowed. But does that help? Pushing it down, treating it like data? Ilara looked away, pretending to study a flickering readout on the console. It was easier than meeting his eyes, which held a sympathy that felt far too raw. We do not push down anything, Dr. Rivers, she replied tersely. Our logic dictates that there is no purpose in dwelling on what cannot be changed. It is efficient, and efficiency is peace. He shook his head gently. It sounds lonely. Lonely. That word, spoken softly, reverberated through her. She had heard humans say it before, but now it seemed to echo somewhere deep inside her, touching a place she hadn't acknowledged. Is that why you care so strongly for one another? She asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Because you fear loneliness? Yes and no, Cole replied. We don't just fear it, we value our bonds because they make us who we are. When we lose someone, it's like losing a piece of ourselves. Ilara swallowed, a tightness forming in her chest. She had spent her life insulated from such attachments, priding herself on her ability to view existence through a lens of pure reason. And yet, the thought of loss, as he described it, tugged at her in a way she couldn't shake. Have you ever lost someone? She asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Cole's face softened, and he nodded. My father, a few years ago. He taught me almost everything I know. Losing him was. His voice faltered, a flicker of pain crossing his eyes. It left a space that never really filled. The words hung in the air, heavy and unvarnished. She had never considered the idea of an empty space within herself. The Serini did not allow such vulnerabilities to take root, but now she wondered, was she missing something by keeping her heart so tightly shut? Ilara took a steadying breath. It sounds burdensome. Cole looked at her, his expression gentle, as though he saw past her defenses. It is. But that burden also reminds us of what we had. And sometimes, those memories give us strength when we need it most. Ilara glanced away, his words settling into her like seeds she could neither uproot nor ignore. Strength in memories. For her people, memories were data to be archived, nothing more. But here was a human, defining strength through vulnerability. Through connection, and it both intrigued and terrified her. Your way of seeing the world is so foreign, she admitted, feeling uncharacteristically exposed. It's almost reckless. Maybe, he said with a quiet smile, but life doesn't come with guarantees. And sometimes, letting yourself feel, even if it's painful, is what makes it worth living. She looked up at him, her carefully maintained composure wavering. The walls she built around her understanding of existence felt as though they were crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of a single, undeniable truth. Maybe she had been wrong. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a world with no boundaries between logic and emotion. Where memories weren't mere data but living pieces of her. And in that moment, surrounded by stars that had seen eons of lives come and go, Ilara felt the profound, terrifying wonder of connection. The day Ilara realized her perspective had truly shifted was the day everything fell apart. A sudden tremor shook the Serene research station, sending warning lights flashing. Ilara rushed to the central console, her heart pounding. The message on the screen confirmed her worst fear, an anomaly in the nearby star cluster, one that threatened the entire station. Time was slipping away, and with it, the stability of their orbit. Her fellow Serene scientists scrambled for solutions, voices crisp and clinical as they ran calculations, coolly assessing the likelihood of survival. But Ilara felt a strange urgency growing in her, an alien feeling that sharpened her focus, pulling her thoughts not to statistics, but to one person, Cole Rivers. She found him in the observatory, gripping the railing as the stars outside shifted chaotically. The deep hum of the ship's systems grew louder, a relentless reminder of their vulnerability. Ilara barely paused before moving to his side. "We're in immediate danger," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil. "Anomaly in the star cluster. Evacuation is being prepared." Cole's face was resolute, but he looked at her, eyes reflecting both fear and something else, trust. "What do we need to do?" Ilara hesitated. The old Ilara, the scientist she had been, would have sent him to the pods without question, prioritizing the mission. But she realized she couldn't simply send him away. "The evacuation pod is at the far end of the deck," she said, forcing herself to remain calm. "It's designed to protect us against cosmic fluctuations." He nodded, but as they turned to go, the lights dimmed, the low hum morphing into an ominous groan. The ship shuddered violently, and Ilara stumbled, only to feel Cole's hand gripping hers, steadying her. Without thinking, she squeezed his hand back, feeling the warmth, the life. It struck her how fragile they both were, and yet, how fierce a will had ignited within her, a will not just to survive, but to ensure that he survived. Together, they made their way through the winding halls, dodging falling debris as the ship buckled. The sound of grinding metal echoed around them, a terrifying reminder of the station's imminent collapse. When they reached the evacuation pod, Ilara guided Cole inside. The door's automatic mechanism closed, but as he turned to pull her in, she stepped back. "No, this pod only has power for one." His eyes widened. "Ilara, what are you doing? Get in here." But she shook her head, her face set in determination. "My place is here. Cole. This is my station. You need to live. For all the reasons you showed me." She pressed the activation button, and before he could protest, the pod began to hum, disengaging from the docking mechanism. Through the thickened glass, Cole's expression was a mixture of shock and desperation. "Ilara," the pod launched, and she watched it disappear into the star-speckled void, a tiny flicker of life amidst the vast expanse. The station groaned around her, the imminent collapse drawing closer. She turned to the observatory window, her heart heavy, yet strangely at peace. She had made her choice, a choice born of something beyond logic or duty, a choice for something she now understood was worth any sacrifice. As the darkness closed in, she felt a quiet certainty settle within her. She hadn't simply witnessed life, she had touched it, felt it, and, for one brief, beautiful moment, allowed herself to be fully part of it.